So there's going to be a bit of a vlog, and it's going to be a vlog about how this camera is for vlogging. But what I'm going to go do now is pick up my new desk, and we'll talk about the camera while we do that. Okay, so before I actually go in and get it, I'm going to talk about the rolling shutter on this camera, which is sort of one of the things that in vlogging you don't really want. And this camera doesn't have a great rolling shutter, but it's probably not something that you're going to notice a whole lot unless you're doing a lot of whips and stuff like that, fast moving horizontal movement. And if you don't know what rolling shutter is, it's how the sensor is basically read and the shutter goes from top to bottom rather than all at once, and it'll take however many milliseconds it is. I think it's like 20 something milliseconds. So if you're going fast enough, you can get some warping of vertical lines. So we could probably just test it right here. Let's go back and forth, and there might be a slight bit of jelly sort of between the top and the bottom. So it's not ideal, but it's like I can deal with it sort of thing. It's not that big of a deal. So that's the rolling shutter, and we're going to talk about stabilization now. Currently I have the standard stabilization on, so not the active. It doesn't crop in at all. So this is with stabilization off, and this lens does not have any built-in stabilization, so this is the 20mm 1.8. So you probably would be able to notice a few like micro jitters and stuff like that, just because I'm holding the camera by the tripod, and sort of the further I put it out, like it might be shaking a little bit, so you're going to notice that. Whereas with the standard stabilization, maybe that'll sort of take that out. And then if I switch to active stabilization, it crops in a little bit, so you can see it is slightly tighter now, and it's digitally stabilized as well. So as I sort of move it, you can see there's a little bit of delay almost, because it's doing that stabilization digitally. It has to think about it, sort of thing. It has to process it. That's stabilization and rolling shutter. Let's go get the desk. We good? Okay. Okay, I did it. Desk is done. Now, I need to pack this one up and get it out of the way so I can get the new one in. But before I do that, let's quickly talk about the time-lapse and slow motion functions of this camera. Now, what you just saw there was part of the slow and quick modes in this camera, where it's that basically built-in slow motion or time-lapse, and that was a time-lapse set to take a photo every second and then play back at 25 frames per second. I think I was recording for like an hour and a half, so I probably sped it up in post or cut bits out, but you can adjust like all the parameters of that, so that's great. It works great for time-lapse. It was recording for an hour and a half and it didn't overheat, and this camera does get pretty warm, but for time-lapse it seemed to be okay. And then when it comes to the slow motion stuff, this can do 1080p up to 120 frames per second and 4K up to 60 frames per second with an APS-C crop. So you cannot do full frame 4K 60 or 50, but you can with a crop. So as long as you have an appropriate lens, you'll probably be fine. So if I ever wanted to do any 4K 50, it doesn't matter if it's super wide like the 20mm. I can just crop into APS-C mode and it's fine. Like it's not really that much of an issue for me. It would be nice to have everything consistent, so every single frame rate that you do is exactly the same framing and focal length and everything, but what are you going to do? There's also multiple formats that you can use in this camera, and I think for most people the best is probably just going to be the standard 4K X AVC S or the HD one if you don't want to shoot in 4K. There is also, of course, 8-bit 420 and 10-bit 422 in this camera. That depends on what you're editing on and if you need 10-bit for color grading. If you want to do a lot of color grading and have everything as accurate as possible, then 10-bit is the way to go. It is just going to take up a bit more space on your memory cards. The reason that I don't shoot in 422 10-bit is because the free version of DaVinci Resolve doesn't support it, which I mentioned in like the first video that I got and I did about this camera. Okay, that's enough talking. Let's pack all this up, I guess. So while I'm packing all this stuff up, we're going to talk about the audio on here. Now, one thing that I really like about the audio on here is you can assign audio level to one of the dials, and I have it to the lockable dial on the top right that is default to exposure compensation. But if you shoot in manual mode, and unless you shoot auto ISO, it doesn't really do anything. So I have that set to audio level, so that means that I can change the audio level and then lock it depending on the mic that I'm using. For example, this mic, the Video Mic Go 2 from Rode, is not as loud as the wireless Go 2 from Rode. So it's good to just be able to know whichever mic I'm using, I can just set it to whatever that is and then lock it and it stays there. But overall, like, the audio quality is, I don't have anything bad to say about it, I don't have anything good to say about it, it's just, yeah, sure, it sounds okay. Obviously, it's not going to sound the same as a shotgun mic like this or a dynamic mic like this, but for an on-camera shotgun mic, this mic with this camera, it works just fine. And then when it comes to ergonomics, by itself, it's like reasonably comfortable to hold. It's bigger than what I was used to before I got it, but it's not too big and heavy. Like, it's, you can carry it around and it's fine. With the PGY Tech Mantis Pod that I have it on right now, it works great to be able to use it. That is a great tripod, by the way. Don't think I've actually made a proper video about it, but it is very functional. But on its own, it's all you really need for if you were just taking it around vlogging. You can put a camera in the hot shoe at the top. You can put a tripod on the bottom. That's pretty much all you need. However, I actually do use a cage on the camera all the time. I never take this cage off. So that means I actually have the microphone mounted off to the side because that's where one of the cold shoe mount is. I have additional cold shoe mounts if I need to, if I want to put, this mic and a wireless mic for whatever reason, or if I want to put a monitor on it or anything like that. It also means that I don't need to put a plate on the bottom of the camera to put it onto this tripod because the bottom of the cage just has an Arca Swiss compatible rail, I guess you'd call it. So that just, like, the tripod just clips straight on. So that's great. And the cage doesn't add too much bulk that it's, unusable for a vlogging sort of situation. So I didn't really do as much testing as I sort of wanted to for this video. Like, I didn't really walk around that much. But I think I have a decent enough understanding of how this camera works for vlogging. And I can say it works pretty well. The very first time I went into a shop to try this camera, I wanted to see what sort of focal length I could get away with for vlogging. And I got to try the camera, and they are sort of what I wanted it for, and I mentioned vlogging, not as, like, necessarily the main thing I do, but I mentioned that as one of the things, and they're like, oh, that's weird. We usually don't get people wanting the A7IV for vlogging, which is fair, because there's the A7S3 right there that everybody uses. That is, like, the vlogging camera. Or the FX3 if you want a little bit more cinema or professional features. Over the A7S3, no, this is in no way better for vlogging. It is better in other ways. It is much cheaper. So I'm not going to say, yes, get it for vlogging, or no, don't get it for vlogging. It can vlog quite well. But really, the biggest downside to this camera in general as a vlog camera, I'm going to not stand in the yellow light, is the rolling shutter. Like, that's really the only thing that is going to hold this back. And the cropped 4K 60. But for vlogging specifically, that doesn't matter as much. But for B-roll, that might matter for you. And this is also a good lens. I'm glad I got this lens for vlogging. A 16-35 would have been good. But also, I do really like the 1.8 on the 20mm. So, yeah. I was worried it wasn't going to be wide enough. But this is plenty wide enough. So, yeah. A7IV, 20mm, f1.8 G lens from Sony. Pretty good setup with the Video Mic Go 2 from Rode on there. Mantis Pod Pro from PGY Tech. that's the setup. It works pretty well. Let me know your thoughts. Okay, bye. Okay, so since I didn't really finish the whole thing with the desk when I did it, this is like almost a week later, by the way. It's been a busy week. I'm just going to show you the desk real quick. Standing desk. So I do have it standing right now. So I can just stand and multitask and stuff, watching LAN show from LTT, editing this video, and look at all this space. And the one thing that I don't really like is the fact that I still have to put my chair somewhere when I'm not using it, because I just sort of have it there. I don't really know where to put it because I don't have the desk high enough to fit the chair underneath it, so I don't know what I'm going to do about that. But I haven't really done much in regarding cable management. There's sort of just cables everywhere, but they're not really in the way, so I may not really do much about it. I have two power boards on my desk. There's a power board right here and one actually behind my computer over there hiding. So then I don't have to worry about power boards on the ground or like sticking them to the legs or something so they're not moving when the desk goes up and down. But that's pretty much it. I have a couple of settings already in here, so I can have it set to this height by pressing my number 2 button. My number 1 button is just my regular sitting one. Number 3 is actually my streaming one. I have it a few centimeters different to my regular one just because of how I sit with a controller compared to with a mouse. But other than that, pretty happy with it. Reasonably cheap as well, like for a sit-stand desk, this is pretty cheap. And then to finish off the video about the camera, I don't really have anything else to say. That's pretty much it. Thank you for watching this one. Like and subscribe and comment and all that stuff. And if you want another video to watch about this camera, there's a couple over here. I'll see you next week. Okay, bye.